All right. Well, it looks like everyone is filtering in here. Good afternoon or good morning to those of you on the West Coast. I'm Jim Boomer, CEO of Boomer Consulting, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Mapping the Evolution of Collaboration in Audit and Tax and Predicting What's Next. I'm joined today by Joe Ballantyne, VP of Sales at Suralink, and Brent Pruim, Senior Manager, Strategic Business Analyst at Rehmann, who I'll introduce here in just a moment. But before we get started, just a few housekeeping items, as well as a few opening comments. So first off, we will be offering CPE credit for today's webinar. To receive credit, you'll need to participate in at least 3 polling questions and complete the survey that will be sent out later today. Second, today's webinar will be recorded and sent out to attendees this afternoon, as well as a copy of the PowerPoint slides. And then finally, we'll be happy to entertain questions from the audience. Since you're all muted, we'll use the Q&A feature of Zoom. So if you have a question, just simply type it in there. We'll keep an eye on it. If it's relevant to the topic at hand, we may jump in. If not, we'll hold it to the end. In the event we don't get to your question, we'll make sure somebody follows up with you at the after the conclusion of the webinar. So just before we get started, I'd like to briefly offer up just some introductory words. You know, technology has fundamentally changed the way we communicate, both in our personal lives and at work. And what might be surprising or may not is just the speed and scale at which the evolution has taken and really will continue to take. You know, it'll continue to speed up. And it was only 20 years ago that firms were going on site 100% of the time, using a combination of fax machines, pagers, and filing cabinets to complete audits. And you fast forward to today, and engagements are completely virtual, you know, done by remote teams and can be located anywhere in the world. So mapping out the evolution of collaboration tools in tax and audit, we'll be able to better understand where the collaboration revolution will take us into the future and what that will mean to your firm. So with those comments, I'm going to introduce our speakers for today. First off, Joe is the co-founder and vice president of sales at Suralink. Since 2014, Joe has been single-handedly responsible for growing Suralink from an idea that started in his brother's spare bedroom to a leader in the industry with more than 550 customers. With more than 10 years of experience selling high-tech solutions, he's thought of as a thought leader in both the sales and accounting industries. Joe has a Bachelor of Arts in International Studies and Political Science from the University of Utah and a master's degree in Diplomacy and International Commerce from Norwich University. Brent is the Strategic Business Analyst for Rehmann's Assurance Department. He's responsible for providing support as the Information Technology Liaison to the department. He's the leader of the department's Information Technology General Controls Committee and a member of the department's IT subcommittee. He is also responsible for leading Rehmann's initiative to identify the audit of the future. During his career, he has been involved in coordinating and performing the audits of local governments, not-for-profit organizations, school districts, manufacturing, and franchising industries. Brent also has experience with federal programs and single audit compliance. So welcome, Joe. Welcome, Brent. So happy to have you both here. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to you, Joe. It's all yours.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to be here today. As you can see, based on the agenda, we really wanted to unpack how collaboration has changed over the years by zooming out and getting a bird's eye view by looking at the following things. So first, the history of collaboration, which should provide some perspective as to how quickly the methods and tools we use to collaborate, specifically with regard to accounting, have evolved over the years. Then I think we'll look at the definition of collaboration, dive into that, because it may seem obvious, but it should provide the foundation and some common ground as we dive deeper into the subject. And with a look at the history and then the definition of collaboration, we'll be able to explore the questions firms should think about as they consider implementing tools to assist them with the collaboration process. And part of implementing anything new is the reality that pitfalls and misaligned expectations can be around the corner. So part of what we'll discuss today are some tips around avoiding common pitfalls and establishing best practices. We'll also explore the impact collaboration technology, or lack thereof, has on firms. There are a lot of aspects to consider, and we're really excited to have great contributors with us today who can speak to these impacts, good and bad, from experience. And lastly, we'll wrap up by looking at what the future holds for collaboration, what new technologies might be around the corner, and most importantly, how firms can put themselves in a position to win today. And then, time permitting, we can allow for Q&A to address any questions for the panel. And if there is still additional time, we could jump into a brief product demonstration. We'll just see how it goes. So, looking at the history of collaboration, it has been really a cornerstone of human culture since the beginning. It's really, collaboration is one of the three key reasons Homo sapiens flourished while other hominids died out. It was a set of shared goals that allowed early Homo sapiens to work together to hunt, forage, and then raise children. And while collaboration is obviously coded in our DNA, thanks to our early ancestors, the ability to collaborate and communicate outside of our immediate geographic regions, it took a lot more time to evolve. A network of horse carts and ferries in the 1700s, then the invention of transportation in the 1800s made it marginally easier for larger groups of people to travel to different locations and meet and collaborate together. In 1844, we saw Samuel Morse invent the telegraph, and for the first time in history, people could actually communicate somewhat instantaneously with each other at a distance. Then in 1845, author Vannevar Bush predicted that computers would one day become a standard device for communication and collaboration. And then by the 1980s and 1990s, this had largely come to pass with products like Lotus and Outlook. So the final step of this evolution was the rise of Web 2.0 and internet-based applications that have now come upon us. But I really prefer visuals, so let's take a look at this. Consider the gap between these events. Humans were collaborating from the very beginning, anywhere from 100,000 to 300,000 years ago. So since then, in the span of 200 years, we've moved from the telegraph to the internet. A big jump from a series of taps to spell out simple messages to holding virtually all of humanity's culture and history in the palm of our hands. So from traveling only as fast as our feet could take us to bullet trains and planes that can travel hundreds of miles per hour, and software that allows us to video share from any location. The rate of this innovation and the evolution of technology is unprecedented, and there's no reason to believe that it won't continue at an accelerated pace. And while this might just seem like a nice little history lesson to start, the ramifications for firms really are real. It wasn't that long ago that firms were, like Jim mentioned, using filing cabinets and pagers. So imagine if your firm were still using those old methods. Would you be able to win in today's competitive market? Now, extrapolate that same concept into today's technology. Can you win, for example, using email and spreadsheets to track audit documentation when your competitors are using the latest software that saves them valuable time and makes entire teams more productive?
That's a good point there, Joe, and I'm glad you brought that up. Is I think there's, still a spot, right, for spreadsheets and how we work with them. We use them, to document things and do all of these great pivot tables and audit documentation and spreadsheets for tax. But for a collaboration tool, and you can, again, we can put them into Teams and Slack, and we can collaborate that way. But when you're working with your clients and you open up things like Slack, Teams to your external users, you're opening up a lot of risks to your firm and to your clients as well, because then that information is being exchanged and there's not a lot of controls around it. And additionally, when we When it comes to interacting with clients on specific engagements, having that controlled environment where the entire team has visibility, status tracking, accountability was going to not only reduce that risk, right? But it's also going to increase the collaboration, and it will become more seamless, and the collaboration will really thrive within the team and help us all work together better when they're all using one platform that has all the tools that we need.
Yeah, I really like how you've differentiated the two, Brent. There's obviously a need for both, and it also comes down just to knowing the situation, kind of like you just mentioned. And let's take a look at some keys to success. The leaps happening in collaboration software today are just as big as and are happening just as quickly as the transition from fax to email. So they're happening really quickly, and it's really only the firms that understand and can react to the changing collaboration environment that will succeed at growing their businesses. So knowing the difference between when to use Excel and when to use something that's going to update live. So here's 4 keys to success that we can keep in mind as we go through today. So the first, finding the right collaboration tool for the job you're trying to accomplish. The second, identifying potential pitfalls when adopting collaboration technology. The third, understanding how collaboration technology will benefit your firm. And then predicting the trends in collaboration technology so your firm can stay ahead of the curve. And so far, we've discussed the history of collaboration, but like I mentioned, it can be useful just to define collaboration. Merriam-Webster puts it this way: to work jointly with others or together, especially in an intellectual endeavor. And this is helpful, but it's fairly broad, especially when it comes to the business world. You may only need to visit a few different software sites to see that the definition of collaboration varies widely. You can see instant messaging, document sharing, versioning, email, whiteboarding, video conferencing, you name it, and a software company probably has put it into the collaboration vertical. Okay. So the problem with this approach, from my perspective, is that they're focusing on the means of collaboration and not the goal of collaboration. Features and technology are obviously a very important part of collaboration software, but they should also work together to support the ultimate goal of collaboration as we see it, to create or accomplish something that couldn't be created or accomplished by an individual alone.
I think that goes back to, Joe, about where we've come from too, right? I mean, we've come from these paper ways of doing things, and how we interacted with each other was by telephone. And now you think about the clients that we deal with, and I'm always concerned about risk. Again, always big on my side of the house of what we're, how are we sharing this information and how is this information being exchanged? But, I talk to clients and advisors today, and oh yeah, I talked to this person via text, or I said that, I sent something on Facebook or some other social media, and that just, just brings all those red flags up, and so having something, intact that's all in one place is very important. And as you're leading into means, the means and the goals too was just a big part of what are you trying to accomplish, right? Like what is the goal of this, and is it going to serve a better purpose for the client? These 2 items that you have here, I think, are really key to all of this, right? Is, we talked about where we came from, and paper and pagers and fax machines and all those days of loading audit books and tax documents and perm files in and out of people's trunks, because that was really safe, right? All this information as we drove around to our clients. But at Rehmann, we started this initiative a couple of years ago where we created a client advisory panel, and we did a whole journey mapping exercise. We mapped the emotions of the clients to how they interacted with us digitally. And the number one thing that came out of that, again, all the other little ancillary things came out too, but the biggest takeaway was, we look at you as one firm, not as an audit department, a tax department, a wealth solution, those types of things. And so to them, they just didn't understand why do you operate this way? Why do you operate in these silos? And so when we, looked at Suralink and trying to figure out what collaboration tools were going to be best to serve our clients, Fortunately, it kind of solved two problems for us, right? And it solved the internal communication on a job to where I was out in the field and, the tax partners, why didn't you get that sales by state spreadsheet, those types of things. And now I have to go ask for it. Or, you ask the client for something multiple times. And I've been on the side of the client as well when an auditor came in. And that's probably number one annoying thing to me is when they ask for the same thing multiple times. So solved the problem of internal communicating, but also the communication with the client, and worked us towards breaking down those silos.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, when you mention you're always thinking about risk and just different ways people at the firm can communicate with the clients, I think training obviously is very important. Just making sure that, if they're going to be talking to them on social media or some way like that, or through text, that it's, an appropriate touch point that's beneficial to keeping in contact with the client versus when you're, working with them on a project or engagement. That's really where you need the right tool for the job. And it can be on like a project by project, engagement by engagement, or, person by person basis. And I think, to your point, the first step in finding the right tool for the job is asking if it solves, one of the two main challenges here, silos between service lines and accountability. And if you can find something that will bridge the gap, that's where you're going to have a much more collaborative experience for everyone involved. And, hopefully you'll have a more efficient experience and just a better experience from a client and a firm user perspective. And, using the new definition of collaboration that we just went over, I think one thing that we can do now is look at how really to identify the collaboration tools you need when you're completing one of these engagements. So as we mentioned, choosing a tool isn't necessarily about bells and whistles, although those are very nice to have and sometimes vital, but it's really about whether or not it helps you accomplish something, in this case, an audit or tax engagement as a team that you couldn't accomplish individually. Or maybe it really maybe you were able to get through them previously, but it really transforms the process. And a quick note, in the instance of an audit or tax engagement, you should also look and just make sure that you can collaborate seamlessly with the client, since they're an integral part of any engagement. And to that end, we've gone through and created an exhaustive list of some key questions that you should be looking at from vendors when you're going through this process. So first up, is it simple to use and easy to get up to speed? Like conversations and communications in real life, collaboration in a virtual environment, it can be difficult and it can be fraught with complications and complexity. So look for a solution that's simple and easy to use, so your time can spend time actually collaborating with the client and communicating, instead of worrying about which buttons to click. And not all implementations are the same. So really dive into that. Another is, does it allow your team to work together in real time? This can take many forms. So for example, in like a PBC software solution, it can mean document requests that update in real time. So multiple team members or firm and client users can be working on different pieces of an engagement at the same time and know if and when something has been modified. If you're still going back and forth with email or solutions that aren't updating live, that's when miscommunication can happen between you and the client. Another, does it allow your team to make clear assignments and delegate responsibility? Okay, so collaboration can be messy when multiple people are involved. More complex engagements, a corporate tax engagement, an audit, you can have multiple people. If you're working on, a subsidiary type client, that's where you have, it could be multiple controllers and multiple people from the client side and different client entities there. And so you'll really want to look for a software that allows you to assign specific tasks to individuals, and also at the engagement level as well. Ideally, it will also allow you to assign due dates and privacy controls. So if you need to lock things down, you can do it. Hopefully the client can do it as well. and possibly also clients being able to invite their team members and remove their team members. That can lessen the risk on the firm side, because you can really put the burden on the client in that scenario.
Yeah, and you think about the nature of an audit, right, Joe? I mean, we're auditing their financial statements, their documents. We shouldn't really be creating our own audit documentation. And so having clear assignments, delegation, and as you said, the risk side. I mean, are we saying, providing access to a potential request or a file, or requesting a file, maybe with payroll information or very sensitive information, and maybe we have where we were told the wrong person to get it from, and somebody fulfills that request, and then they're seeing something that they should not have been privy to. So I think anytime we can, especially in audits, and again in tax as well, where we're relying on the client to provide that information, and we can give them the responsibility, that's going to help us as a firm.
Definitely. Now, another item here is, does it help your team communicate quickly and clearly? And I'd say that there's more to good communication than just chatting back and forth. Obviously, there's a lot of methods for that, but you do need to be able to discuss specific requests or pieces of an engagement in the context of the individual request, rather than having conversations that can get siloed or lost in people's inbox. So that's definitely important. And does it allow your team to share necessary resources and information? So files are a critical piece in today's collaborative businesses, but many collaboration solutions aren't good at accepting files that are large or non-typical, like video or QuickBook backup files. They may have a limit on a 1 to 2 gig limit, which is going to be an issue there when the client's providing something really large. So good collaboration software should definitely allow you to share an unlimited amount of documents and any file size securely.
That's a big point there, Joe. I mean, we run into that even just in general email, right? I mean, if you're just trying to email a file or you zip a file, well, then your security team comes in and blocks that file because it's a zip file, and that, that's a disruption. Now, what have you had to do, right? You have to call the client again. Oh, can you send it to me in a different way? Can you send it to me that way? So, and we know that data isn't getting any smaller. As you said, the increase of speed as technology and as we move through in the history, the size of data only will continue to grow as well.
Yeah, exactly. So another good point is it purpose built for the task you're trying to accomplish? And that dovetails into this. Many tools, they take a broad approach versus a deep approach, and they try to be everything to everyone. And the problem with this approach is that they usually end up not working well for a lot of people. So I highly recommend looking for a solution that is built specifically for the task you're trying to accomplish. It's standard practice for forward-thinking companies to have a tech stack that involves numerous solutions that handle specific tasks. So don't be afraid to go deep with multiple solutions to address the needs of your firm. And then, we'll get into APIs and tying them together later, but that's a way potentially in the future that you can tie them together. The next one is, does it have integrated collaboration? Does it really provide integrated collaboration? So your team shouldn't have to be logging in and out of various platforms to share resources and information and have conversations. So really look for one that allows team members to communicate, share, and work in a single location with updates. And that should also help facilitate remote work, which is next. So because not only do you need a solution that allows you to work within your existing team that may or may not be in a single location, but it should also allow you to collaborate with other teams in your state, your region, or internationally. And then finally, we have a couple more to finish up. Does it foster spontaneous communication and collaboration? So once again, make sure methods of communication are really easy. And does it support a superior client experience? And this is really a big one. When looking for a collaboration solution, it just absolutely must support a better client experience. Clients that are forced to learn something that's bulky, unintuitive, or old, they are potentially at a higher risk for churn. And one of the primary reasons you turn to a collaboration solution is really to provide a better experience. So if you find one that clients really enjoy, it can be a huge reason for them to continue to work with you. And such a tool could also be used in your proposal process. It's something that can really differentiate you. And of course, not every solution will be able to check all the boxes, but I think a good solution should be able to provide most of them. And once you've selected a solution, the next step is to ensure that you can avoid pitfalls that happen a lot with firms when it comes to implementation and ongoing use. So I think we can now take a look at some of the most common pitfalls and best practices and really think about how we can avoid them. So jumping into these, the first is the proliferation of technologies, and the pitfall being that users are being bombarded with too many technology options. This can be overwhelming. They can often experience login and subscription fatigue, and sometimes they may not want to use a solution because of that. And so a best practice here is really make sure that you're using single sign-on. That way, your users don't have to remember another username and password. And if you're not using this right now, I highly recommend looking into it. It's a big efficiency gain, but it's also a security gain as well. And a couple other things you can do is set up personalized live trainings with a provider and make using the software required and not optional. Really think about sunsetting old processes and old solutions.
I'm going to jump in here. So I'm going to tie it back to something both of you have said. So Joe, you kind of ended the questions with the importance of the client experience, and Brent, earlier you were talking about that, and just, I mean, it bottom line should be, your goal should be to create that frictionless, streamlined process and experience for your client. And we see this time after time in the work we do with firms on process improvement. And we're seeing a bigger focus on this whole client experience. So when you have different processes and technologies to collaborate, I agree with both of you have made the point, like making sure that the tool meets the goal of what you're trying to accomplish and that you're matching that up. But we also see a lot of, depending on service line, depending on office, even depending on partner, there's these personal preferences of, I want to use this tool. And it does not create a frictionless process. It creates confusion and chaos, both internally and externally. So I wanted to jump in and emphasize, as much as you can streamline it. And even if you need to use multiple tools, think about it from a client experience perspective and how you can put forward your best foot and how you interact with them.
It goes right back to what I said earlier too, Jim, is just, they look at us as one firm. They don't look at us as those departments. Yeah. And so we have to operate that way. And if we don't, we're going to lose them very quickly, because they're going to see then be frustrated with those handoffs. That should just be seamless.
Yep.
Yeah, I would add that I've heard from firms, they're working with the same type of corporate client, and the corporate client is receiving a different experience from one team than the other.
Yep.
That's a really common example. And if the experiences are not the same, then it's definitely going to kind of show on the team that may not be providing quite the same experience as the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the last thing you want to hear from your clients, of course, is, but you don't talk to those other people in your firm, that just doesn't look well, and it just doesn't, show well. So finding collaboration tools to, like you said, Jim, to reduce that friction is the important part, and use those single sign-ons and things as much as possible to keep it simple. And technology should be simple, right? It should make our lives better. It should make us work more seamlessly and easier.
Yeah, and definitely, and sometimes too, your teams may need the same documents or may need similar pieces of documentation from that client or the same, and so potentially one can get it before the other and share it with them, and then so the client's not getting the same request a couple weeks or months later.
I think on your next point there on the slide is the implementation challenges. You talk about time consuming, complicated, the making sure it takes a commitment, right? I mean, I think as you said, you have to have a top-down commitment approach when you implement something like a collaboration tool, because it not only impacts the clients, which is very important, but also your associates too. So many times we just throw tech, or at least that was the old way, right? We would, maybe still today, we throw tech at something and we think that's going to solve a cultural, client experience and internal associate problem, but we don't have any basis for it. I mean, what's the basis? Oh, it looks nice, it looks shiny, and we think it looks cool. But I mean, is it really based off solving a problem, the goals that you talked about before? And is it, coming from the clients? And so I encourage when you're working through those implementations and challenges to ask clients to be part of it. Ask your good clients to be part of it, and I give their input, because I think that's a big piece of it. And don't just have it be with the internal teams. Have it be with your advisors and those a group of younger staff, right? The ones that are going to be using it. Those are the ones that are going to be very quick to point out whether something doesn't work for you.
Yeah, definitely. I work obviously with a lot of firms, different sizes, and one thing I've seen is there are firms where, and it's something you did really well, Brent, when I worked with you, was like, you had a definite approach. You were the champion. You had people working with you alongside you, a committee. At times there are certain firms where there are multiple people involved, but there's really no one driving it and really leading the team. And so, although they see the need and they know there are issues with their process and they need to move forward, because there's no one driving it, it's really easy for them to potentially put off for another 6 months, another year. And so that can be something that hurts them. And then back to going to your clients, I think proactively going to your clients and saying, hey, we want to try to implement something that's new, that's really going to solve some issues for you. That just lets them know that you're thinking about them and want to provide a better experience. And especially with how remote we've all become in so many different ways, anything that we can do right now is very helpful for them. And then they're probably also working with other professionals that may be doing this as well, right? Mm-hmm. So another one on the list is security. There are times when I work with firms and we go through the entire sales process and they don't even ask to review a SOC 2 report. Sometimes this can be a little bit of an afterthought. So some business users may not have the knowledge to ask the right questions, or there may not be just a certain set process at the firm when it comes to reviewing security. That tends to not be the case with larger firms. IT usually has those in place. So this is something more for maybe mid-sized firms to be thinking about. And a best practice here is really to think about putting together a standard rubric for evaluating all software, and then enforce the same security protocol across the firm. Don't leave it up to individual users. Because back to Brent, you bringing up risk, if it's not unified and you don't have a unified approach, that's when you have risk, is if certain people are doing things that others are not.
And it doesn't have to be hard or complicated, right? From a rubrics or what you're describing there. When we started many years ago, making sure that we had we're evaluating a process for security of evaluating new software that we'd be bringing into our environments and our people would be interacting with. It was just a simple questionnaire. And those, it might have, Joe remembers us sending it to him, it was probably 10 very simple questions of, the URL, do you have a SOC report, so you can get those questions down and answered very quickly. And then that provides, here I am using my auditor it's your documentation, right? That vendor is holding up to their end of the deal as well. And that they have those protocols in place, because they are, as we all know, dealing with very highly sensitive information.
Most definitely. And I think another one that I'm seeing more firms start to really consider is, our vendors are they conducting both internal and external penetration tests on their applications? That's kind of one that more firms are thinking about, but I think it's one that more should be thinking about definitely as well.
Definitely should be on your questionnaire.
So the next topic here is educating clients. There may be some clients that don't want to learn new software for different reasons. So really a best practice is ask the vendor for materials they have to make onboarding and training as easy as possible. Potentially, maybe they'll provide some direct training, but position new software, as we kind of mentioned already, as a benefit, something that's going to enhance their experience, save them time, and really propose it that way, and then help educate them as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like you said, the vendor should have a tutorial, just a one-page handout that you can provide to your clients, sample, invite emails, or discussion topics when you're talking to your client about implementing a new software, especially a collaboration one that affects them. Is they should have those tools for you. And back to, and educating the clients, but also, and I don't remember if we have it here, but just support, right? Support is a big piece of it. Who's providing the support? Is it the firm providing the support or the vendor providing support? So, when you're evaluating collaboration softwares and other things, you test their support, actually pull up the chat box and see what happens and see how fast your responses are, and go through their help libraries, because remember, that's what your client's going to have to do if you're going to rely on the vendor.
I think the other thing to mention here, highly related to client education, is the whole idea of the education of your team or internally. When we hear from firms, Joe, you said clients may not want to learn a new technology, or more often they'll go, well, our clients won't do that, or we don't have an email for them in this day and age where every grandmother and grandfather's on Facebook to see their grandkids. But anyway, what we find is, as we peel that back, oftentimes those aren't the root of the problem. The root of the problem is that the client-facing professionals aren't educated about the tool or the process change, and so they're not personally bought into it. They haven't invested enough to see the value. And I know for myself, it's hard for me to sell somebody on the value of something if I haven't seen it, tried it, learned about it, and have sold myself first. So that's where, you got to make sure you have adequate internal training so people, the clients won't use it or don't want to is real, and it's not because of the person that's delivering it.
Yeah, great point. It's a point of resistance I come across quite frequently is, well, what are our clients going to think? Or I'm not sure if our clients are going to like this. And, I usually also say, well, what's their current experience? How many steps are involved? What's their process like? What complications do they have right now? How will something new solve it? And then how can you easily communicate to them how it will be solved and how they can use it very easily. Mm-hmm. So yeah, kind of just back to, if you can present, and to your point, Jim, to the professionals, how they can easily talk about it and introduce it and really win over the client, I think that's how you get people on board. So then the final bullet point here is, lack of success criteria. So maybe there's no way to track ROI, or lack of buy-in from leadership or teams. And so a best practice here is establishing success metrics with the vendor right out of the gate, and getting feedback also via survey, maybe from your firm users and potentially even your clients, take their experience, and then report on that to leadership to be able to prove out the ROI. Be thinking in those terms as well.
Yeah, and it goes a long way, as you said. Whenever I'm buying software or thinking about, looking at a new vendor or relationship to roll out either firm-wide or at a department, it's, what does the business always ask? What's the business case? What's the ROI? Give me the numbers, give me the quantity, tell me the dollars, the time, the hours saved. And, you can come up with some, your vendor should be able to help you do that, which is a big part of it. But also, something that often gets forgotten is the intrinsic, intangibles that are out there, right? I mean, those client satisfaction surveys, as you mentioned, the associate satisfaction surveys. It might not be a metric that's first on your mind when you're thinking about spending money on technology, but when you follow it up with that, and I love that you said then report that to leadership, it will go a long way to really show that what you have chosen is increased your your confidence score with your customers and with your associates. So I just think that's a thing that gets just missed sometimes in your evaluation process.
Yeah, most definitely. I've had I've heard back from like IT leaders potentially that have been using our product for multiple years, and the leadership will say, "Is it worth the cost?" And that's really where, when they can provide the feedback, it can translate to leadership, because they're not the ones using it on a day-to-day basis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Jim, maybe we roll into the first polling question.
Yep, it should have launched for you. If for some reason you're not seeing the polling question right now, it may pop up behind a window if you have something else open. So our first question is, in your experience, which is the most common pitfall firms run into when implementing new software? And our options are the 5 major pitfalls we just went through. So we'll give you a little bit of time. And just as a reminder, we need you to answer 3 of the questions throughout the webinar today and complete the evaluation afterwards. So we're starting to get results in. It appears there is a clear leader. I'm going to give it another 10 seconds, and then we will close this poll out and share the results. All right, going once, going twice. All right, let's close it out. It looks like 55% said implementation challenges, followed by educating clients, and then we have a tie with proliferation of technologies and security, and then finally lack of success criteria.
No surprise there, I don't think, Jim. I think when you're rolling it out, you just have to really define your processes, right, and work your way through it. So.
Well, and really number 2 is really part of the implementation process too. I mean, clients, whether it's an internal or an external facing software, you have to educate the people that are going to use it. So yeah, I would say agree, not big surprise. All right, Joe, back to you.
Yeah, now that we've established the questions to ask and pitfalls to avoid and best practices really to implement, we'll focus on why this technology will be critical for firms moving forward. And I know there's quite a bit to get through, so maybe we can go through some of these a little quicker, make sure we hit the polling questions for everyone. But as you can see, when it comes to client experience, if done wrong, consequences can be damaging, but if done right, there's a lot to be gained. You can drive efficiencies, make clients happier, and just make them more appreciative that you thought about a way to improve their experience. And when it comes to the employee experience, if done wrong, similar consequences can be damaging, just in different ways. Word can spread through places like Glassdoor and online communities about their experience, and ultimately losing that industry knowledge. If someone were to leave because of something like this, it can be hard to replace. So really try to do this right. Think about how much time they're spending collaborating with clients, and think about the tool they have. Is it enabling them to get the job done quick and easy and have a good relationship with the client, or is it more difficult?
They expect that. Oh, go ahead, Jim.
I was going to say real quick, I want to emphasize this point because for 2 reasons. One, employee experience has a direct correlation to the client experience, which we've hit home quite a bit, and we've touched upon employee experience. But number 2, the time we're in right now, it's critical that you get the employee experience right, because the war for talent is real. And firms are struggling to find the staff that they need, and you need to do everything in your power to make it a good experience while they're there and keep them.
So, and then another important aspect is efficiency. Once again, if done wrong, everyone feels and shares in the pain when you have to take a long time to get something done, and it can be costly to the firm. But if done right, you can offset some of the need for new talent if you're gaining efficiency, and you can have higher realization on your jobs as well. And once again, back to the better experience. And before we get started on predicting some of the possible upcoming trends, I just want to talk about how firms can evaluate emerging technologies and really stay on top of trends.
Yeah, and I can add some, commentary here where, and some of these are a reality today, right? Some of them are being implemented today among firms and through other lines of business. But what's really important, is to have an innovation team or group, whether it's at the firm level or at each department level, like we do here at Rehmann, to just keep an eye on everything and take time to evaluate them. We have an innovation committee for each of our service lines. And it consists of not just the same old people from the committees that they typically are part of in those departments. They're the up and comers. It gets the newer staff associates involved in that process. And and again, your product, Joe, Suralink, came out of that committee there, an audit, and then it just grew, just right from there. We brought that, we got a sandbox environment set up, and really from there is how we watch those trends and keep things moving. So just very important to have people with an eye on it as you move forward.
Yeah, most definitely. And we talked earlier about setting up the primary person driving, but what you're getting to too is like having a team of champions that can then train others, especially at a firm your size. That's really vital to making sure it just goes as seamless as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So, predicting how any technology may or may not evolve is tricky business. But with that being said, let's take a quick look into the near future and just see what could be coming. This should be interesting. The first, we don't have to look too far into the future to see VR and AR. It's around us. A lot of people have it in their homes now. RSM recently published an article about how they're using Microsoft's HoloLens to review work papers in Japan. So some firms are looking to implement it on that type of an experience, and with remote audits becoming more commonplace, it's possible that's something that could increase in usage. So we'll just have to see on that one. But this is one that is really, I really like a lot, that's coming out as fast as integrations. The accounting industry, it currently lacks really an up-to-date unified platform. So you have different vendors providing different pieces of the audit and tax process. No one vendor has yet to be able to provide the holistic solution, but many vendors excel at the piece of the puzzle that they do provide. And in the next few years, we should see a lot more. We should see open APIs and native integrations just continue to increase. They've been increasing the last couple of years, but hopefully we'll start seeing more practice management solutions speak with PBC software, which can speak with the work paper software and scheduling providers. So hopefully, whether someone builds it out themselves or if not, they can all just connect. And a lot of your existing solutions should start to talk to each other in the coming years. And more importantly, for the purpose of the white paper that came along with this, is the current video platforms like Zoom and Teams will become standard integration into many applications. We've seen those just proliferate through accounting firms in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I think it's just it's a big part of your decision-making process, right? Is you sometimes, like I said, in today's environment and technologies, you gotta have to choose, right? You have to choose between something that integrates or something that has a feature set. And I think that's a big piece of a decision that you have to make as a firm or as an innovation committee. What's going to provide the best experience? and make the most sense. And so sometimes you do have to side with features over something that's integrated. But what you want to be hearing from your vendors is that they have an open API or that they're developing more APIs. So when you're talking to these vendors, good questions to ask. You know, do you have an API? What capability? Could we see your list of API connections? Because then you can take that back and work with vendors or work with your internal IT teams to hope, like you said, make them all talk to each other.
Yeah, and it also really helps push vendors so that they know what should be on their roadmap. That's something that we're consistently looking for, is just feedback from firms to know what to do next. Because if it's going to help one firm your size, it's going to help the others. And so that's something that it's very beneficial when firms are having that type of an approach. Automation, this is a big one. It's one of the most beneficial aspects of technology in general, and you see different vendors trying to automate different things. One thing that we made a focus on when the AICPA came out with their new hosting standards was making sure that retention was automated and very flexible for different teams, whether because your audit team may have a retention policy that's 90 days versus your tax team may want to keep documents around for 7 years. So allowing firms to set different policies by team or even on a per client, per engagement basis is something that's very helpful.
Yeah, and again, right to automation is that was probably the biggest thing for us, is always retention. And if you're going to be having multiple teams, very important. But also with any type of collaboration software is, when you're in any software, just take the time to sit down and define your processes and write those, again, I'm going to say write, but type those policies out and make sure that you have step by step how these things are going to be rolled out, how they're going to be implemented, what your best practices are going to be, and train, lead, top down, get a commitment from the firm to do it, because that is just only going to lend yourself to more automation as you go forward. So.
AI and machine learning, these are big buzzwords. And by the way, many vendors talk about their offerings. You'd think it was old news, but we're seeing baby steps here in accounting with this coming in. Hopefully, it can continue to evolve, but most likely going to be within the realm of chatbots to start. But maybe moving into larger, more complicated projects in the future.
Yeah, I would agree. I think when we're specifically talking about collaboration, I mean, data is huge with, AI and machine learning. We all know that, how that's going to affect our practice. But when it comes to collaborating, the AI piece is really focused on establishing those procedures now so that when you can implement the AI on top of it, it's going to be very important and be beneficial to you.
Blockchain, this is something that's really interesting with what the Bitcoin blockchain continues to do. It's becoming more and more relevant. I'm a longtime Bitcoiner, and one thing that's been really interesting is the use of Bitcoin now by the country of El Salvador. They're bypassing Western Union for their remittances now, and the country starting this year has been saving between $600,000 and $1 million per day on remittances from El Salvadorans here in the U.S. So that's going to disrupt the payment industry very quickly in the coming years, because other countries in Latin America are already taking a look at that. And so, there's other blockchains out there. The Bitcoin was the original; it's the only decentralized. But there's the possibility that blockchain will have an effect on collaboration technology in the future. We could eventually see people using blockchain to verify identity before they participate in an engagement, because it is a true record. So that's going to be interesting to see how that continues to evolve. And then, social and professional networking. Brent, you touched earlier on how your firm will use different social media to keep in touch with clients in different ways. So that can be very beneficial. LinkedIn is kind of the be all end all, but potentially we may see more industry specific networks pop up in the coming years, I think. And then finally, customer experience tooling. We touched on this a lot, but this should just continue to increase by industry. Really, more and more vendors taking a look on how they can really refine the experience with different tools and different processes. And Jim, maybe we'll jump to the second polling question.
Yeah. So let's see what everybody thinks in terms of the biggest trends in technology in the next few years. So we just went through several of them. There's not an all of the above option, nor is there a way to account for convergence too. That's a major thing, that multiple emerging technologies will come together to have an even bigger impact. But we're getting answers in here. We'll give it a little while longer. Once again, I'm seeing one emerge as the leader here in AI and machine learning. And we'll give it another 5 seconds and we'll close this out. All right. 54% said AI and machine learning, followed by blockchain and integrations, and then automation. And we did get a question on APIs. I want to make sure we get to polling question number 3. So maybe I'm going to throw it out. And you want to go through the key takeaways, and then we'll address that question on APIs.
Definitely. So, the key takeaways, the pace of collaboration technology innovation, it's only increasing. Okay, so be looking at changes, be cognizant of whether the vendors you're working with are updating their applications on a regular basis, or if they're not, who is innovating, who is not. Leadership really should undertake an honest assessment of their current position in the market. Are you using something outdated? Are you using something new? Are you thinking about what's next? Success hinges on implementing the right tools. So be aware of the pitfalls like we went over. Establish those best practices. Those best practices are key. And then understand the benefits and stay on top of the trends. Finding the right tools starts with asking the right questions. So be thinking about those. A lot of those we went over are key. And the impact on the firm, both good and bad, if you don't act, think about that. Think about how you can measure your ROI, and then be keeping an eye on the future and be cognizant of it.
All right, great. Well, here's a couple questions. So APIs, are great. Most of them, there's time required to have a local developer. The gist of it is, do you have any ideas on how we can deal with our solution providers to require them to provide APIs, so you don't have to have the custom APIs, then have internal developers? Any suggestions on how to manage solution providers from that front?
I'd recommend being very vocal with them. When our clients are vocal with us, that we're very proactive in listening to and taking feedback. It's how we prioritize all of our development. It's what led us to develop an open API, and it's what's leading us to put a lot of custom integrations on our roadmap. It's really just the feedback from firms. So let them know, and then let the vendors in the market that don't want to integrate with others, let them know that it's frustrating, and potentially it's something that may make you consider looking to others. I think those are some things that you can really do to kind of push vendors in the right direction.
I would agree, Joe. I think you should be able to rely on those vendors and many of their products too today. Is they should be simple, right? They should be easy to use, enhance your experience. So they should work without them in most cases, but rely on your vendors for that. Push your vendors for those APIs. And if you don't have that experience on site to be able to pull things out on your side at the firm, then just look for a partner to work with them.
And then the other questions on Suralink's integration with either Wolters Kluwer or Thomson Reuters accounting firm suites.
So that's another one where I'd speak with the larger vendors on those. I'd ask them. We are actively speaking with Caseware, and they're very open to it. It seems like they have a new view on integrating with others. So we're moving forward on that, and hopefully we'll see the same with Thomson and Wolters Kluwer as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the more you can let your voice be known on this issue, and I think you can also point to how every new tool that's emerging in the marketplace is built with an open architecture, and that experience, whether it will ultimately make a difference or not, but I think the more they're hearing that message, the more likely that we'll have some movement there. So, all right, well, we are just a minute away, so I think I'll wrap up. If there are other questions and we don't get to them here, we will make sure that we follow up with you after the conclusion here. But I want to say thank you to Suralink for sponsoring today's webinar, and a special thanks to Joe and Brent for a great discussion on mapping the evolution of collaboration. And finally, and most importantly, thank you to our audience and everyone out there for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you on a future Boomer Consulting webinar. So have a great day. Thank you.